So the first phase of the War for Independence took place in New England, around Boston. And eventually the second phase would be in the mid-Atlantic, where eventually in upstate New York you had Patriot forces defeat the British at the Battle of Saratoga. A few other things were still at play, though. The Americans didn't really have a whole lot of resources, and the British still had an exhaustive amount. It became obvious that in order for the independence movement to be victorious, there would have to be aid from somewhere abroad. Okay? The British have a lot of enemies. And there's one enemy in particular that has a real bone to pick with the British. I wonder who that might be. Were you thinking it's the French? Yes, oui, you are right. The French hate Britain, and they are still very bitter about all that they lost in the French and Indian War. They lost almost all of their American territories. They lost to their bitter biggest rival, and they lost world prestige. That struck a massive economic and egotistical blow to France. So, France, you recognize that your old enemy Britain has a rebellious colony that wants to declare independence and strike fear in the hearts of British and to kind of alienate the British Empire. Well, now, France saw the United States as an opportunity to kind of stick it back to the British. We're going to get a little redemption out of this thing. Okay? So, okay. You provincial Americans, with you. That's my bad French accent right there. It sounds more like Pepe Le Pew. Otherwise, though, France would have to be convinced to enter into the war, offer supplies, armament, weapons, and even troops to fight alongside for the War of Independence for the United States. That would have to be negotiated. Who better than an American founding father who spent many years in France, was highly revered in France for being the great scientist, and was also thought of this folksy provincial British colonist in America, Benjamin Franklin. One of the reasons why I love Benjamin Franklin so much wasn't just because he was the image of a self-made person in America, but he was incredibly intelligent. See, Benjamin Franklin was largely credited with many European scientific circulations as having invented electricity. He didn't invent electricity, but he basically, with his key in the kite type moment, he basically helped garner recognition that electricity does exist within lightning. Okay, that was a scientific discovery, and the French ate everything up. They even had coins in circulation with Benjamin Franklin's image on it at one point. And Benjamin Franklin was this highly shrewd guy. The French thought of Americans as this kind of simple, provincial, oh shucks darn kind of cute people. Unsophisticated. Okay, that's what provincial means. Unsophisticated, simple, kind of folksy. Benjamin Franklin was anything but. However, because he recognized that's how he was portrayed and thought of in France, he played that up. Okay? So this kind of folksy, goofy type guy goes to France to negotiate the French entry into the American War for Independence. France wants to be, they want to recognize this new nation, but they're reluctant. They want to see more proof that their entry is worthwhile. Remember, the French lost everything in the French and Indian War. They wanted to know if they're going to re-engage that they're not going to have the same thing happen. Well, by the time Benjamin Franklin makes his way to Paris to help negotiate the French entry, the Battle of Saratoga had already taken place. Remember, the Patriots defeated the British at Saratoga. That was all that was needed. See, here's Saratoga. We defeated a superior British army. if you enter into the war with your help and your resources, we're going to win this thing. And that was it. That was all that was needed. So eventually, Britain would get word about Saratoga, and they would try and make a peace offering and say, hey, colonies, we'll let you have various autonomy. We won't tax you. You'll do your own thing if you remain loyal to the crown. France sees this and says, you know what? While the window is still open, before the Americans accept a peace offering to stay within the British Empire, why don't we go ahead and decide to move stake and still stick it to the British? So no, Americans, you do want to fight this war. You want to be your own country. Don't you want to be your own country? I don't know. That's French speak English. Okay. In February of 1778, Benjamin Franklin formally negotiates the French entry into the War for Independence. Okay. France recognized the United States and their right for independence, and they will provide military supplies and assistance. So from that point forward, you're going to see a broadening of the American war extend elsewhere. And one of the places it's going to extend, you're going to bring other European powers potentially into this as well. You see, the Spaniards don't like Britain either. Neither do the Dutch. Okay? So you have other European powers who see an opportunity to kick Britain while they're down. We hate those British. We want to get them back. Spain in particular, they want to fight against the British because they're struggling for a chunk of Spanish territory near the opening of the Mediterranean Sea, where the Mediterranean and Atlantic meets, Gibraltar, which is a port city near the very southern tip of Spain. It's actually controlled by the British, even though it's on the Iberian Peninsula. It's a bitter point of contention for the Spaniards at this time. They may have a stake in seeing Britain struggle. So do the Dutch. And so it becomes important as now you have other European entities struggling to help the United States win its independence. Because now Britain's going to have, they're not going to be able to concentrate on any one single area. They're going to have to fend off the French, and Spaniards are upset. We've got this going on over here. It's going to dilute their resources. And another thing that's working against the British, well, actually a couple different things. First of all, the war's being largely fought in North America. That's in the Patriots' backyard. Second of all, the cause for independence is greater among the Patriots than it is for them to be kept in the British Empire from the British point of view. So, those are two very big distinctions to make. The British aren't as committed to the cause. They want to save face and they want to keep their unruly colony under control, but they're not as committed to the cause as Americans are for independence. And then you add in the other European powers who add a little bit of gunpowder to that mix, things are going to change. But the war itself is still going on. And even though France is now supplying various different weapons and other resources and even troops into the fray, there is a third phase. You see, the first phase took place in New England. Second phase in the mid-Atlantic, specifically in New York, New Jersey, parts of Pennsylvania. The third phase is the American South, the Carolinas in particular. Virginia, the Carolinas, down into even Georgia. Okay? The British thought the southern colonies were very important because that's where you have the largest concentration of Tories, your British loyalists. You see, Britain had basically said, if you stay with us, then we will allow you to keep slavery. Okay? You had revolutionary fervor among slave owners in the South when the British would say that if you were a slave, you could be freed. So those who remained loyal to the crown, slaves, you would win your freedom upon end of the conflict. Well, if you're a Southerner and you own slaves, that ain't good. So now all of a sudden, you have a split, not just among slaves, but you have other slave owners who trade largely with the British. That is their largest source of revenue. That's their biggest trading partner. If you have a fraction of relationship, that's going to destroy your business. So what you see in the American Southern colonies is really a split in ideology. You have Tories that are loyal to the crown, and you also have patriots in and amongst. Britain smartly wants to exploit this. They see, here's an opportunity to do something about the war without us actually having to fight it. We're going to get these colonial loyalists to do our fighting for us and maybe throw in a couple Hessian soldiers in there, a few here and there. And that'll be our war effort. And then when they start cleaning up, we're going to send Lord Cornwallis in there to basically finish everything off, and we'll end this war. And these unruly colonials will go back to being our provincial servants, if you will. Okay? That was the idea. And it worked for a while, especially in the Carolinas. You had some very bitter fighting among loyalists and patriots in the Carolinas. So much so that they would often weaken each other. What is a miscalculation among British forces, though, they miscalculated the strength of loyalist forces in their engagements with patriots. And eventually, in the southern colonies, patriot loyalists would overtake, or patriots would overtake the loyalists. Okay? So, when Lord Cornwallis was named the British commander of Southern Royal Forces, he expected there to be more dissension and breakup, and he didn't quite get it. And eventually, you have American troops who were ordered by George Washington into the Carolinas, into Virginia, and you would have French troops come across the Atlantic and up from the southern colonies, and they would basically meet Lord Cornwallis's troops at Yorktown in Virginia. See, Lord Cornwallis had decided to pull his troops out of the Carolinas, where he had seen kind of a breakup of the Loyalists, and move them up to attack central Virginia, if you will. He made it to coastal Virginia, not that far from the original American colony at Jamestown, by the way. So you have Yorktown right along the Chesapeake, and he would settle his troops there, except he fell into a trap. The French forces were off the coast, and Patriot forces were coming inland, and he was surrounded. You have Britain's most powerful military commander surrounded. And eventually he would surrender. Okay, that was in the fall of 1781. So a few different things happened. When it became known back home in Britain that Lord Cornwallis's army surrendered, people back home in Britain eventually got fed up. They wondered, why is this so worthwhile? Why are we still there? Why are we still fighting when we're not winning? And all of these European powers are joining the cause against us. Why is it worth it? And it became obvious that Britain was going to lose control. Now, in order to negotiate an official end of the war, you need to have a treaty. France didn't want to sign a treaty until their ally Spain got Gibraltar back from Britain. Okay? That was going to take a little bit longer. So even though most of the end of fighting happened in 1781, it wasn't until 1783, in September that is, that the Treaty of Paris was officially signed. The Treaty of Paris officially ended the War for Independence in favor of the United States of America. It laid out several different things, including recognition of clear-cut independence. Okay? We recognize you as a clear-cut sovereign nation independent from us. You are your own entity. You are the United States of America. We formally recognize that. It's somewhat unclear, but otherwise, though, the territories of the original 13 colonies and then extending all the way from the southern border of France, or southern border of Canada, rather, all the way to the Mississippi River, including the Great Lakes region, from the southern border of France all the way to the northern tip of Florida, all the way to the Mississippi River from the Atlantic Ocean. That would now formally be the United States. Okay? So the United States of America receives this huge, massive force and this huge, massive territory. You not only defeated the world's largest empire and declared independence, you've vastly expanded your territorial claim. You're your own country now. Okay? The reason why the American War for Revolutionary Cause and the first shots were called the shots heard round the world was that the American Revolution was the first large-scale colonial revolution where you have a European power lose one of its biggest colonies. And the war for American independence would set off a chain reaction of all kinds of other wars for independence all throughout the Americas, all throughout Latin America and elsewhere throughout the Caribbean. America's war for independence set the standard, set a precedent. You do not have to be oppressed by your colonial oppressor. You don't have to live with that. You can be your own. You can formulate your own government and your own standard. You are a separate entity from your colonial oppressor. Do you hear that, Spain? Because you're about to. The American Revolution is the benchmark example of what colonial revolution should look like. And all throughout the next century, you have almost every southern or every country in the Spanish Empire that currently exists today follow suit. We set the example. We set the precedent. We'll do other things that set precedent on a world scale. But the war for American independence is the benchmark example for all that is possible with former colonies. You're welcome, world.